Gerald Hutchins had lived alone for 11 years in the same blue-shuttered house on Maple Creek Road, and he had made peace with the silence a long time ago. His wife Eleanor had passed from a sudden illness back in 2012, and since then, the house had carried a particular kind of quietness that settled into the walls and the corners and the kitchen, where her laughter used to bounce off the tiles every Sunday morning. Gerald was 63 years old, a retired school teacher with arthritic knees and a habit of drinking chamomile tea at 8 o'clock every night. And he had told himself many times over that this was enough, that a man his age did not need more than a warm house, a garden, and the occasional phone call from his daughter in Portland. He believed that until the night of the storm changed everything he thought he knew about what a life could still hold. It was a Thursday in late November, when the rain came down in sheets, so thick you could barely see the mailbox from the front porch. Gerald had just settled into his armchair with his tea and a library book when he heard something that didn't belong to the storm. A knock, frantic and desperate, like someone hitting the door not with a fist but with the last of their strength. He opened it to find a woman standing in the downpour with two small children pressed against her sides, all three of them soaked to the bone. The woman's face a map of exhaustion and something darker, something that looked like a fear that had been running for a very long time. Her name was Miriam. She was 34 years old, and she had fled her home in the next county that very morning with her son Daniel, who was 7, and her daughter Sophie, who had just turned 5. She had left behind a husband whose anger had become dangerous, grabbing nothing but a bag of clothes, the children's stuffed animals, and $60 in cash. Her car had broken down 2 miles up the road, and she had walked in the rain with one child on each hand until she saw the light in Gerald's window and prayed that whoever lived there had a kind heart. Gerald did not hesitate for even 1 second. He opened the door wide, ushered them inside, wrapped them in every blanket he could find, and put a pot of soup on the stove before Miriam had even finished explaining. He gave Miriam his guest room and set up the pull-out couch in the study for the children, tucking them in with the old quilts Eleanor had sewn decades ago. He asked no questions that night except whether anyone was hurt, and when Miriam shook her head, he simply nodded and told her to rest. In the morning, Gerald quietly made calls. He reached out to a women's shelter coordinator he had once met through the school district, helped Miriam navigate the legal steps to file for protection, and drove her to every appointment she needed in the weeks that followed. He sat in waiting rooms with Sophie on his knee, reading her picture books while Daniel stood close to Gerald's side with the cautious trust of a child who had learned to be careful with grown men but was slowly unlearning that fear. Gerald never asked them to leave. Days turned to weeks, and weeks folded gently into months, and what had begun as a single, stormy night became something none of them had planned but all of them needed. Miriam found work at a nearby medical clinic. Daniel started at the local school where Gerald had once taught and came home every afternoon with drawings he left on the old man's pillow. Sophie declared one morning at breakfast that Gerald smelled like cookies and that she intended to call him Grandpa, and Gerald had to look out the window for a long moment before he could respond, because his eyes had filled with something he had not felt in 11 long years. The house on Maple Creek Road was no longer quiet. There were cereal bowls on the counter, and small shoes by the front door, and the sound of cartoons drifting down the hallway on Saturday mornings. There was laughter in the kitchen again, the kind that bounced off the tiles, and Gerald understood, finally, that the silence he had made peace with had never actually been peace at all. It had simply been waiting. Miriam often told people later that a stranger saved her life on a rainy November night, and Gerald always gently corrected her. He said she had saved his too, she just didn't know it yet. Sometimes the family you never expected arrives soaking wet on your doorstep, and all it takes is one open door and a heart willing enough to let them in. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who believes in the power of kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Corner Stories for more stories that remind us what it truly means to be human.